With almost a dozen new Pokemon fan projects, and even the release of Legends EA, October 2025 has become one of the best times to be a fan of the series. So, of course, I'll be going over the best Pokemon fan games or ROM hacks released or updated in the last 30 days. And with this being a monthly series, you're definitely going to want to subscribe to never miss out on a single new Pokemon fan project. But before we continue, I'd like to talk about an upcoming monstertainment game called Elestrals Awakened. And while this is a sponsored segment, I am actually involved with its development, building the maps and levels of the world. But it's an HD 2D monster catching RPG from the creators of the Elestrals TCG, a brand led by veteran Pokemon YouTubers A-Drive and Shady Penguin, who combined have 40 years of experience in the genre. Set in ancient Greek mythology, you'll explore a massive world, bond with over 100 unique Elestrals, and construct a powerful team to challenge the Divines. Battles revolve around the unique Spirit Point mechanic, where health and energy are a single resource, creating a dynamic combat system where every ability and attack is a trade between power and survival. Awakened establishes the tones and themes of the Elestrals universe, connecting directly to the TCG and future projects. But by backing the Kickstarter before November 7th, you'll be able to obtain alpha and beta access, receive exclusive in-game unlocks, purchase physical Kickstarter promo packs, or even become an NPC or caster in-game. And in doing so, you aren't just supporting the game, but also my own journey as a game developer. So don't wait any longer, and support the Elestrals Awakened Kickstarter campaign using the link in the description or pinned comment below. Let's begin with a recently completed ROM hack called Pokemon Tourmaline. This is one I played the demo for at the beginning of the year and came out having to force myself to voice a lot of criticism. And having just played its 1.0 update, I can't say I noticed too many improvements. As always though, I do like to start with the positives. Pokemon Tourmaline takes place several years after the events of the original Hoenn games. It's sort of an unofficial sequel to them, and I think the writing does a pretty good job with that, with both returning characters and plot points that connect the hack to Pokemon Emerald. But overall, it's not a super deep story, nor was it one that left me with a lot to think about after each story arc. You will mostly just be traveling across a region with the goal of collecting 8 gym badges, although I will compliment that the region is very vibrant and diverse. The map doesn't do a good job of displaying it, but the routes and towns contrast each other very well, and there are a lot of hidden areas to uncover. Despite such a diverse region though, the Pokemon variety was very lacking. Your early game options were a mix between generic regional rodents, weak bug types, and those with pretty late evolutions. Combined with the little amount of trainers to grind from, I didn't have much motivation to experiment with a team I wasn't already familiar with or confident could handle most of the challenges that would come my way. In fact, I think the hack just suffers from a lack of EXP in general, as trying to build a full team of 6 required that I fought every single trainer in the game just so that I could barely be on par with the next gym leader. I said it the last time I covered this hack, and I'll say it again. I think if you're going to force level caps onto the player anyways, having the EXP all, or at least an abundance of trainers to battle in the early game, wouldn't do any harm or hurt the hack's balance. Overall, I can't really say I enjoyed this one, and other than a couple dozen new moves and abilities, it doesn't have too much to keep me interested over many other ROM hacks. But I will point out that I have seen many people with the opposite reaction, enjoying it greatly despite the lack of modern quality of life. So the best thing I can recommend if my criticism didn't deter you is to give it a try and see for yourself whether or not the hack is for you. The next 2 segments, though, are going to be a bit shorter, and that's because they're both projects I've already covered in full videos released this month. The first one is Heart and Soul, a GBA ROM hack that I claim to be the definitive Johto experience. What I mean by that is not that it's the best, rather, it'll provide the highest percentage of players with a positive experience. The hack accomplishes this with not only updated graphics and quality of life systems like the EXP all, all, but also a massive amount of customization options. These let you tune the difficulty, grinding level, and even battle mechanics. Best of all, the project is entirely open source, meaning anyone can use it as a base for a future difficulty, story, or whatever kind of gameplay experience they'd like to create, without having to take the time to remake the entire Johto region, or implementing the dozens of other features most modern ROM hacks offer. It's a project I highly suggest you try no matter what type of player you are, and if you want to learn more, then I highly suggest watching my full video on it in the description below. Moving on though is a very impressive completed fan game called Hydro Bliss. Now, what makes it so impressive, you ask? Well, it just so happens to have 2 regions, each with around 25 towns and 18 gyms respectively, leaving you with over 100 areas to explore and 36 gym badges to collect. With such a massive amount of content, you might be asking yourself if there's a catch, if there's something underneath it all that lessens the experience despite everything there. Well, to my surprise, there really wasn't. Sure, the game almost entirely lacks a story, but on the gameplay side, it played pretty well. You'll have Pokemon from all 9 generations to capture, and the gym leaders put up a decent fight that didn't leave me feeling like I could just mash A to win every battle. The routes and towns were also designed pretty well, at least for the recommended region. I will admit that the other one did feel a bit more amateur in design, using mostly default tiles in pretty unoriginal ways. But with everything else the adventure offers, I don't think that'll weigh it down too hard. Either way, if you love Pokemon battles and exploring new regions, then I highly suggest giving it a go or watching my full video on the game in the description below. Over the last few years, the roguelike genre has become incredibly popular within the fan project scene. But what I'm about to show you is probably one of the most unique Pokemon experiences I've ever seen using the roguelike formula. This is Pokemon Record Keepers, a ROM hack where, as a brand new record keeper, you've been tasked with figuring out the mysteries surrounding various myths and folktales. Right off the bat, I want to first say that this hack is very visually unique. I've played a lot of ROMs with unique or visually appealing art styles, but this one here is just absolutely incredible, and unlike almost anything I've seen in a Pokemon ROM hack. But you'll start a run by selecting an affinity based on weather, and then choosing a story. Once inside, you can interact with the Pokemon around you and begin a battle. Now, this is where things get very interesting. As well, it might just seem like a normal battle layout with a very pretty UI, you can actually use the L and R buttons to swap Pokemon without taking up a turn. This will become one of your biggest advantages in combat, as not only does it allow you to make predictions with less drawbacks, but your off-field Pokemon will actually heal their HP and negative stat drops based on how many turns they've been off the field. Upon defeating an enemy, you'll gain access to a new move that you can then distribute to any of your Pokemon. From my experience, there's no limitations to what attacks each one can possess. These moves also come with some flat stat increases, so even if it's one that you don't think will be useful to select over other attacks, it can still serve a purpose to one of your team members. Before you enter the area with the wild Pokemon though, you'll actually be able to choose from a selection of bosses, and after defeating that boss, usually a legendary or mythical Pokemon, you'll receive an ability that, just like the moves, can be applied to any of your team members. As you might have guessed, you are in fact able to stack these abilities. I've got to be honest, I've never really been a fan of roguelikes myself, even outside of Pokemon fan projects. But this one kept me engaged for a lot longer than I expected, and I highly suggest it to anyone who desires a more interesting turn-based gameplay loop using the Pokemon IP. Before we move on though, I would like to take a moment to go over some honorable mentions. Projects that are a bit smaller, but in my opinion, still deserve to be here. The first one is Mario Red and Luigi Green, an enhancement hack that swaps the first 151 Pokemon, as well as many important NPCs with characters from the Mario series. I'll admit I do feel kind of mixed about this hack. The gameplay is fun, with most of the new Pokemon being enjoyable to use in battle, while while having charming sprite work, and the overall difficulty of the game felt very balanced. However, it does use the same maps, tile sets, and story progression as Fire Red for most of the game, leaving me pretty demotivated to continue playing, so do keep that in mind if you choose to play it yourself. Up next is Pokemon Inkwell. This is a pretty short hack where you play as a Pokemon who's forced to explore a foreboding mansion filled to the brim with puzzles and dangerous enemies. As you progress, you'll get stronger, pick up items to improve your chances of survival, and even befriend other Pokemon. One of the more interesting catches, though, that I haven't seen in any other Pokemon roguelike is that in order to heal your team members, you will have to sacrifice one of their levels. A full run shouldn't take you very long, but the various upgrades in Pokemon you can acquire, as well as the different enemies you'll encounter, allows for a lot of replayability to be had. So if you're a fan of roguelikes, then I highly suggest checking it out. The final honorable mention is Chaos Purple. This is one I covered a few months ago, and I praised it for being very impressive, as it's an NDS ROM hack that takes you through a very updated version of the Kanto region. And that's not at all an exaggerated statement, as you'll find many of the maps that have been stretched horizontally or even vertically, taking advantage of the 3D landscape of the 4th generation. On top of that, you'll also find some new story events that weren't in the original games, and some new locations, like a sewer system underneath Cerulean City. If you're wondering why a project like this sits in the honorable mentions section, well, that's because, like I said before, I already covered it a few months ago. But the hack did receive an update a few weeks ago that takes you up to Cinnabar Island. So, with a decent amount of content available, I highly suggest giving it a go if you aren't afraid of unfinished hacks. Up next is Pokemon Edelweiss Chronicles. This is a project I've had my eyes on for a few years now that I finally decided to give a real playthrough since it received an update just a few weeks ago. This game has a big focus on storytelling, as you'll first begin with a short prologue that explores a segment of your early life, meeting a strange creature after wandering into the local cavern. Years later, that creature will join you on an adventure across a new region with the primary goal of locating your lost sibling. On that journey, you'll explore various dungeons and collect gym badges in order to become stronger. While I didn't dislike the overall direction or progression of the story, I do feel that a lot of the dialogue was severely held back by the quality of the translation. But as always, good translation or not, I'm still thankful it exists and allows me to understand the rest of the game. What really stood out to me about this project, though, was the overworld design. The region was incredibly fun to progress through, with every different town and route contrasting each other in both their layout and graphical approach. Not to mention the dozens of optional areas you can explore, like dungeons with powerful bosses at the top, or caves filled with useful items to collect. Exploring its region was easily my favorite part about the entire game, and even if every other aspect of it fell flat, I'd still enjoy the project thanks to the exploration alone. Now onto the gameplay. The main gimmick of Edelweiss Chronicles is a collection of new Pokemon and regional forms available to capture. Balance-wise, they were all pretty good, and I didn't feel disappointed with any of the ones I decided to use. Although I will say that this is one of the few fan games where the Fakemon designs didn't really land for me. I thought most of the regional forms looked great, but I can't lie that I avoided using most of the new Pokemon due to their design alone. But even if you agree with that to a further extent, I don't think it's something worth not playing the game over, as the Fakemon that do exist were pretty few and far between, and could be easily ignored. Overall, I think the game is pretty good. It has some flaws with the translation and some bugs with a couple of the menus, but nothing game-breaking or extremely deterring. So, with it being around 70% completed, I highly suggest giving it a try if you aren't afraid of unfinished fan games. What you're looking at right now might be one of the most technically impressive feats I've ever seen in the Pokemon ROM hacking scene, because this isn't a hack of some spin-off title or non-Pokemon game. This is a hack of Pokemon Emerald. Now, unfortunately, I don't have much footage to show of this hack because it's puzzle-themed, and I suck at puzzles, and didn't get very far. But I did want to give it a shout-out because it shows just how far Emerald decomp ROM hacking has come, allowing you to create games that don't look anything like the originals. In fact, I want to give a shout out to the entirety of Team Aqua's Hideout, a group of talented developers who push the limits of what should be possible with Pokemon ROM hacks, and showcasing them in often short but incredibly high quality hacks like The Pit, Spirits of the Storm, and even Inkwell and Record Keepers, two projects I already featured in this video. So if you want some unique and interesting ROM hacks to play, then I highly suggest checking out the Pastebin link in the description below. But that's just about going to wrap up this video. I hope you were able to find something new to play, and if not, then definitely check out the rest of the videos on my channel for a nearly endless catalog of Pokemon fan projects. Anyways, thank you for watching, thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.